All right, well, thank you very much for coming to the summit and for this panel. This is a very special panel for me, actually, because I've known people on the stage for 5, 6 years now, and John Nahas works with us, and Pat also I've known for a long time. The mission of Ava Labs and Avalanche is to tokenize the world's assets. And I first got into this space about 8, 9 years ago purely as an investor, but then I really saw the potential and utility of this space when the ICO boom happened in 2017. I was in traditional finance. I was in some funds buying private shares, real estate stuff, and when I realized that I couldn't do that for myself, these assets were very exclusive, only for these funds that I worked at. And then when the ICO boom happened, I said, wait, here's a mechanism, if done correctly, can provide access, fragmentation, more liquidity, better price discovery for all of these assets for everybody, everyone in this room, including me personally, not just me, the institutional side. So I went off on this journey and I became CEO of the Digital Assets Group at Shares Post, where that's when I met Carlos, who was also on the same journey trying to digitize and securities. I was trying to do what they call a change of membership agreement of an ATS, which makes it a compliant way and a regulatory proper way to do this. Pat and Oasis actually have an ATS now. We did too. The only issue back then was that I think these people here are visionaries, and they were a little bit early. The other problem, the second problem, frankly, was we did the math with the engineering team at my old firm. If we were even successful, technologically, it was impossible to do it at a cost-efficient manner because the cost of doing tokenizing like a Reg A plus type deal will cost you tens of millions of dollars. These firms might as well do an IPO. So when I met Gun, well, actually met Gun before way this, but we saw the technology was solved by Ava Labs at Avalanche, and hopefully together we can still solve the other problem, which is to provide more access, create more liquidity, better price discovery, so everyone in this room can get access to the Ubers, the Lyfts, and the Airbnbs before the IPO, so that you can participate with the VCs in the price escalation. So with that said, I'm going to start the questioning with Carlos here. Carlos, why does it take so long? And when will it be so that everyone here can buy the next great private share?
So yeah, it's taking a while. John didn't fully explain how involved he was in the space, but together in 2018, we actually did the first legal trade of a token representing a security using an ATS license that John was managing at Shares Post. That was 2018. I don't think people don't realize that John also touched over is the complexity of the technology. These tokens are ERC20 tokens, but as opposed to most of the ERC20 tokens you guys are familiar with, they have a very, very complex set of smart contracts that control the compliance of these tokens, because these tokens represent regulated instruments and they kind of freely travel from wallet to wallet. So there is a lot of complexity in terms of making them happen. So technology was obviously a problem, but I think getting the necessary licenses and the necessary regulatory clarity was another problem. And there has been, especially in the US, which is where we operate, there's been a lot of changes in the last, I would say, 2 years that give a lot of the clarity. So going back to the original question of when this is going to be possible, well, in April, we're going to be doing on Avalanche the first Reg CF, it's a regulation crowdfunding offering of $5 million for a company called Security Token Market, which is going to be a full Web 3.0 experience in terms of very similar to what you experience on DeFi. You go to our website, you will connect your wallet. Your wallet will have to have an ID attached to it because we need to know who you are. It cannot be 100% anonymous, and it happens on DeFi, but it will be a very similar process, very simple, KYC process to attach your wallet to an identity. You will connect the wallet to the web. You will then submit USDC on Avalanche, and then a smart contract will swap the USDC by a token that represents securities and equity on this company that is conducting the Reg CF, which is an offering up to $5 million where retail investors are allowed. And we can do that because now we have our XCF portal license, which before we didn't have. We can do that because we have now a very streamlined process of creating IDs and attaching wallets. And we can do that because Avalanche also now supports this swap of tokens with very complex smart contracts behind the scenes in a very efficient, cost-efficient way. So I think this is now the beginning of an era where a lot of people will try to use these regulated ways of raising money without taking the regulatory risk if you want to do it like a pure ICO, but with the same benefits, right? Retail accessibility, very Web 3.0 experience-centric, paying in crypto, swapping tokens. The token represents, an irrevocable proof of ownership into the securities. These tokens will trade later on our regulated marketplace and others, et cetera. So I think that we are here at the beginning of the, tipping point on when these things will become a reality and not just a dream as we had the last 4 years.
Excellent. Pat, when I was there, I got access to an ATS, and I probably killed an inordinate amount of brain cells working with the SEC and FINRA to do a change of membership agreement to allow it to trade private securities. You guys have one, and you're able to get it to trade stablecoins as well, correct? How was your journey to make that possible?
Well, first of all, thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you, Avalanche. This is a fantastic conference. We've been going down the conference route, and the vibe here is fantastic. The professionalism is unbelievable, and we're very excited to be here. So the journey, I think it's important just to give a bit of background on myself. So I'm not a technologist, but I play one. I'm an investment banker. 25 plus years. I used to run groups at Credit Suisse, First Boston, globally, and at Bear Stearns, JP Morgan. I ran capital markets. 6 years ago, I was a skeptic. I was such a skeptic, I opened a Coinbase account, never did anything with it. And then I became a believer with MakerDAO. MakerDAO, if you're familiar with DeFi, big backer of ours going back about 3 years. That's why I'm wearing my Maker socks today in homage to them. So in regards to my background, going down purely the retail route, to me, was going to be a long slog. So we started thinking at the a couple of years ago, institutions, retail, accredited investors, broker-dealers. But to tipping point, to Carlos's point, from my perspective, what I've seen in my history on Wall Street is credibility, large institutions coming in. That's when the tipping point's going to come. So that's what we were moving toward. So part of, with Maker as one of our investors and backers, DAI, which is their stablecoin, was critical to that approval. So we went down the process with the regulators. We lost a lot of brain cells consistently. They would push back hard on digital cash or digital securities transactions on the secondary market. We can do that on the primary, others can do that primary. But on the secondary basis, and we just kept slogging through, we came up with a solution. What we'd like to say is the secret sauce, and today we can do an atomic swap with Anchorage on Avalanche when it's ready to go. We'll be launching in the next couple of months on secondary side, launching at the end of this month, early next month on the primary side, and we're most excited about Avalanche and what they've put together in terms of efficiency and cost, and we think it's a winner in the financial services space.
Awesome. The next person, oh, you don't have a, so a very important person, John Nahas. He's one of the heads of BD, and one of the smartest things I did and one of the best things that happened to Ava Labs was John Nahas. Without him, a lot of things will not get done at the firm, and I thank you for that, first of all. And he and I talked sporadically, but he also had a similar journey. He worked at a crypto enabling firm before that he was in a traditional role, and then he actually helped his firm sell to a traditional finance company. So John, what are your thoughts on this space, and why did you join Ava Labs?
Well, first of all, thank you, John. And yes, I lost my voice, so it's not a problem with the audio. To John's point, previous to Ava Labs was founding team at a company called Token Vault. And what we did is we built a retail app for digital asset investing, trading, spending. What we built was a money market token for Franklin Templeton, We got acquired by Franklin Templeton. At the time, they were 800 billion assets under management. They're about 1.6 trillion now. And they saw in the future that this is the way things are going to end up being. When we did our raise for our company, we did a security token offering. The SEC hauled us in. They said, you did an unregistered securities offering. You did an ICO. We went in there. We said, here's our registration with the SEC that you clearly didn't read on your own website. Here's our Reg D filing, here's our Reg S filing, here's accreditation, here's KYC. And they were shocked. They were like, all you did is take the word share and replace it with token. And you did it the same way that the rules exist today. The point of what I'm trying to get to is, these gentlemen have dealt so much with the regulators. I dealt with the regulators on a basic thing, and they're just not catching up. And the reason they're not catching up as well is because I feel like the incumbents that exist in this space, so to take it back to Franklin Templeton, that bought a company to do tokenization, 2.5 years later, still sitting on that technology, not doing anything with it. And what I've seen, and I think what Pat's doing, what Carlos and Jamie at Securitize are doing that's amazing, is this has to happen organically. It has to happen outside of the existing system. Because what I see, whether it's Onyx or JP Morgan or any of these guys, they're going to try to have a solution. And then they're going to try and sell their solution to their competitors. And that's never going to happen. Because everyone's going to try and kind of outdo the other. So Franklin buys a technology, no one else is going to use it if Franklin buys it. And that's what we saw happen. But the work that's being done on the retail side, on the institutional side, will matter, right? I think at the end of the day, the technology layer sitting behind these shares will make it easy, right? On apps, on whatever it is. You don't need to know that it's a token, but it will be a token because it'll reduce friction and allow things to happen faster.
That's ultimately what's going to allow the democratization of all this, and this is the reason why I got into it, was to give my personal self the advantages I had as the institutional self. I know Carlos has a lot of thoughts on this subject and democratizing things. Why don't you share yours?
Sure. I want you guys to step out and go in a bit of a more abstract thought to get what we're thinking that is going to happen on the industry. So, I'm old enough to remember when internet started. And when internet started, there was kind of like the same promise. This is going to democratize access to certain markets that were either very inefficient or dominated by, gatekeepers that control how that happened, right? And then what internet turned out to be, if you think of it as a public utility, was a very, very efficient way to create two-sided marketplaces. And the best example is advertising. Like before internet existed, there was no efficient way to advertise. If you were a small, let's say, a restaurant on a corner of a store, there was no efficient way for you to advertise directly to your target audience. And if you were Coca-Cola, yes, you could advertise, but you didn't know to whom you were advertising because you just put an ad on TV that was consumed by a lot of people you wanted to, but also by a lot of people you didn't want to, right? So it has a problem for both, for small people that didn't have access to the advertising market, as well as for the large ones to do it in an efficient way. And then internet and Google and then Facebook and other companies created this very, very efficient two-sided marketplace, which what it enabled was two things. First, the advertising market actually became bigger, not smaller, which is something people thought the internet was going to destroy. And second, it created this long tail of advertising that didn't exist before, right? And then if you extrapolate from advertising to content distribution, to communications, to commerce, to food delivery, to taxi hauling, and all these industries, were enabled in a very efficient way the long tail of these industries by internet, right? So now, if you think about public blockchains like Avalanche as kind of like the next version of the internet, as public utilities that have one thing that internet didn't have, which is the ability to transact with things that represent value. That's basically what a blockchain does, right? It's a public distributed ledger that allows you to represent things that represent certain value, whether it's a currency, whether it's a securities, whether it's a collectible or whatever, a tree like this guy was talking about before. So and then very efficiently be able to transact and then put it into the hands of people, price discovery, trade them, etc. So if you think about blockchain that way, then the natural evolution of what public blockchains will allow is the long tail of capital markets, and that's where what we're actually solving for. So we want to do two things. One is we want to take, the Franklin Templeton or KKR or, Apollo, these guys that have very good investment products that are only available for institutional investors, to make them available for everybody, democratize them, give them access, provide fractional ownership, eliminate friction using tokens, on-chain ID for signing, subscription agreements with your MetaMask wallet rather than going through a PDF file, and like all that stuff that you can streamline by using blockchain, and then providing, liquidity, price discovery, trading, etc. But we also want to do the opposite. As I mentioned, we are enabling on Avalanche, a small company that is emerging on the space of security tokens called Security Token Market, to be able to raise $5 million with a token on a compliant way from their audience, because these guys are marketing firms, so they have a big audience of themselves. And they've actually done what's called a test the water campaign, and they've already got interest for $7 million. So these guys will actually be able to access capital markets and raise money directly from their community with a token. So these are the two things that we're solving for in terms of democratizing access to capital markets. Big people being able to distribute downstream, and small people being able to access to capital and liquidity, etc.
So I was a young kid right out of school, investing both in the private rounds and the public securities of things like Google and all these targeted advertising companies like DoubleClick back in the day. And for me, it just made so much sense that all of a sudden, what you guys probably all don't realize was there was a time when literally things were done on a CPM rate card. It was literally like Mad Men, the TV show. And then when I looked at this, and I was like, wait a second, you can actually attribute and figure out how your dollars and what your real return on your dollars are when you advertise. It just made all the sense in the world to me. But it was actually happening quite slowly, just like securities being done right now. So I was just like, wait, why is this not happening? I couldn't understand why this was not happening. And then they had these things called upfronts. Upfronts are when all the major networks, they have their list of shows, they come to New York City, and they show these advertising agencies all these shows, 30-second slots, whatever, and then they all go out to these nice, Michelin star restaurants with their steak dinners and their, three-piece suits, their Hermes ties, and basically they got to convince these, like gray hair or bald, no disrespect, men to go and, bid on this stuff. So I instantly realized that those people who are spend an entire life getting to where they are, the last thing they wanted to do was let me, a 22, 23-year-old kid, take away their cash flow. So they were smart. They're not dumb people. They knew exactly the benefits, but they did not want to let go. Pat, you were at Morgan Stanley Capital Markets, the heart of this. Does Morgan Stanley really want this to happen?
Credit Suisse and JP Morgan. In my eyes, they're above Morgan Stanley, but that's me. No. The answer is no. They don't want this.
So that is the problem.
Yeah,
it's not a technology problem.
But let me.
People don't want it.
Right, they don't want it.
You guys have to make this happen.
Exactly.
The community here has to make this happen.
I would say there's some people at Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley led our Series B. We are the only investment in crypto they've done. There's some people at Morgan Stanley.
They did invest in you.
Yeah, there's some people at Morgan Stanley that want to make it happen. There's some other people at Morgan Stanley that are the ones that John described that don't want to make it happen because they're going to be disintermediated, which are basically the wealth management people.
But from a strategy perspective, right? Your Morgan Stanley is looking for a return, a portfolio manager. But at the C-suite on down, they don't want to see this happen. But they're positioning themselves right now to insert themselves in this market. And that's okay, because the market right now is 5%, maybe, well, for security tokens, it's 0.00001%. We want to get it to 10% or 20% of the market. In order to do that, you need a large custodian, State Street, Bank of New York Mellon, et cetera, that credibility. But to Carlos's point, John's point, and John's point earlier, when I talk about institutions, the institutions that we're talking about, maybe KKR, maybe ABS issuers, what they're looking at is the blockchain. We're also about DeFi, but that's not part of the discussion with the large institutions. We're going to bring that to them. Fractionalization is a big part of their thought process right now, and this is where it gets really exciting. So right now, they're only issuing to large institutions. Let's say it's an ABS issuer. Asset-backed securities, that can be car loans, auto loans, credit card, a whole host of different asset classes. Individuals can't invest in that. The yields are very attractive, and you can determine, because they're tranched, your risk reward. If you want to get a 15% return, you have the highest risk. You're at the bottom of the stack, right? But individuals can't invest in that. These ABS players, and I think soon we're going to see one of them, two of them moving to an ATS and start issuing. Day one, only institutions. Day two, early next year, fractionalization, retail, accredited investors. That's going to be very exciting. That's what we're seeing. But to your point, Morgan said, do they want this to happen? No. But they're going to figure out how to get involved, because banks have been doing this for over 100 years. They're always in the middle of everything. And I remember the ad market, the residual market, and they were doing that. The residual market is what they couldn't sell. So what they used the internet for, I raised money for a company like this. They put it on the internet, and there was an order book, and you could buy ad sales. So if something was $100,000, they were trying to get rid of it at 3 in the morning or something. They'd sell it for $500, and you could bid on those things. So I remember those days. And to Carlos's point, they thought the internet was going to kill the market for advertising. It's been the opposite, because of all the data. It's all data driven. The exact same thing is, in my opinion, is going to happen in the security space, because once that technology layer is solved, which we're very close on it, once that credibility layer of KYC AML, which is an important aspect of it from a regulatory standpoint, and then the UI experience is the same as you experience today, I think that's when it's going to become ubiquitous.
I think you need to understand that the large corporations, whether it's financial services that we're talking to now, or I was at the telco industry before, or you can think about even, computers and many, many different industries, they suffer what is known in the industry as the innovator's dilemma problem, right? This very famous author called Clayton Christensen, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago from Harvard, that he came up with this thesis about saying why large corporations do not innovate, right? Which is what we're talking about. Why they don't embrace blockchain as a way for them to do capital markets? Well, because that's not what we're being rewarded for, right? Like the guy from Morgan Stanley that does wealth management, he's not going to care about the 0.0001% of the market when he dominates, let's say, 20% of wealth management distribution in the US. So he's going to optimize that, and that's what he's being paid for, right? But companies like ours, which are small, then we have an incentive to make this thing, which is irrelevant today, relevant tomorrow, which for incumbents in industries like, let's say, Morgan Stanley Financial Services is not going to be relevant. Now, the solution for them is actually what they're doing, which is, okay, let my guys do what they do, but because this is the future, but it's going to take 5, 10, 15 years, let me invest here to make sure I have a stake into what the future of capital markets is, while I milk the present of capital markets, which is what I do today. And that's exactly what they're doing, which I think is the right thing to do. So,
Professor Christensen was one of my favorite professors, and he was a brilliant man. From one brilliant man to another, John, you see 60 to 80 deals a month at Ava Labs. I don't know what percent of them are more securities oriented than traditional crypto native, but of the ones you see from your vantage point, what is the first asset class? Are we talking about real estate? Are we talking about structured products? Are we talking about what I was trying to do, the private shares, so that everyone can own a piece of venture?
So I think over the past year, we started to see an uptick in what's coming in. This year, I think we're really seeing a shift, because what we're seeing is things that people would want to buy first, right? Real estate is going to happen. Equities are going to happen. But I think for that shift to happen, you need to excite people. There needs to be like the killer app, or in this instance, that killer asset that gets people interested. And what we're starting to see a lot of is music. So buying the rights to an artist's music, or a future album, or future royalties, right? Because of course you see this happening with NFTs, but if you're investing in something with the expectation of a return, it's a security. And you're starting to see musicians wanting to do this with a future album, which now you're an investor, you're a member of the community, you're a fan, you're tying everything in. You're seeing this with film. So we're doing initial film offerings. So you're going to have documentarians and movie producers raise money from the fans of whoever the screenwriter is, whoever the star is, whatever it may be. So I think at that level, when we start to see these things now, when it's tapping into the art and culture and brings people along, those same people at the incumbent financial services and banks, et cetera, I think we'll start to have to make a move, right? And they're going to start to have to realize that if we don't offer our customers, because let's be frank, they don't care about anything except the customer, or at least that customer keeping their money with them. So until that customer says, I want this, or I want that, they're not going to do it. They're going to keep selling them the same old stuff they've been selling for 30 years, right? There's a reason why everyone thought Bitcoin was terrible at the banks, and then all of a sudden now they have Bitcoin, because their customers will leave. They will take their money and they will go elsewhere. But from the deals that I'm seeing, it's across the board. We're seeing real estate, we're seeing potential equities, we're seeing, though, I think the most is the culture aspect.
So I agree. There's going to be new business models and new asset classes created. And this conference is about bringing the community together. And every single panel I do, I always make sure the community or the audience gets to ask one question. In this case, I'm going to ask this kid who literally emails me and calls me every other day to stand up and ask me a question. For anyone on the panel, introduce yourself. He's stalling to think of a question right now.
Thank you. My name is Eric. I helped co-found Cornell Blockchain, and that's how I met Goon and John. My question today is, what specifically about Avalanche and its functionalities makes sense for securitizing assets compared to other technologies, other layer ones?
I'll take this one. So if you look at the current...
You're biased because you work at Avalanche.
He's also the best person to answer this question.
I think if you look at the existing L1 landscape, you have these monolithic chains, these public utilities, right? But in dealing with securities in particular, you need KYC, you need AML, you might need jurisdictional requirements like accreditation, privacy requirements depending on the jurisdiction that you're operating in. And this is where private markets can be created on subnets. Again, it comes down to it. One size does not fit all for blockchains, right? I think all of us know that if this industry is going to scale, you're going to need to have app-specific chains, and some chains do that. There's NFT chains, there's enterprise chains, there's supply chain chains, etc. Avalanche as a public utility has the ability with subnets to create these permission markets, such as the institutional DeFi subnet that we announced with Multiverse, right? You have these players coming in. It's going to be gated so that they know each other's, the counterparties that are involved with one another are all KYC AML'd. And you can start to see that with securities as well. You can have a US-based market for accreditation. You can have a European one based on whatever rules that exist in this market. So aside from the fact that we're faster, we're cheaper, we're more green, I think the ability to create the functions that are needed on an app-specific or asset-specific basis really changes it.
There is a panel. No, I think that's correct. So it's not about, when people say, oh, well, Solana is fast and this is fast, blah, blah, blah. I think is not understanding the point, because yes, there's many blockchains that are fast, but the ability to create these subnets that are all connected and have the same security model is what could potentially make Avalanche very, very distinct in terms of doing it. There's another panel at 3:30 just to talk about this topic in the CARPA scenario, that we will talk about permission markets on subnets for Avalanche. So I think you guys, if you're interested in the topic, go there, and then we'll be for half an hour just talking only about what John described now.
Well, I want to thank Carlos, Pat, and John. Great panel. And most of all, I want to thank everyone here, the community. We're very humbled by this attendance.